For nearly 5 decades, Voyager 2 has drifted into the black, a ghost ship of human curiosity sailing farther from Earth than anything we've ever built. It whispered steady telemetry into the void. Particle counts, plasma sweeps, cosmic ray blips, all the predictable signatures of a probe coasting the interstellar sea. Then, one transmission broke the pattern and everything changed. Voyager, which was never set up to take pictures, delivered a structured, high-frequency signature that analysts now call a visual cipher. Not an artifact, not static, but a layered signal with shape and intent, a true cosmic find. At first it read like noise, a dense cloud of heat, a smear of analog static from an old TV. After enhancement, layering, and careful time-filtered analysis, that smear resolved into form, startling, unfamiliar, and unmistakably looking back at us. It wasn't a star, it wasn't a planet, and it didn't belong to our solar system. Its geometry and structure were alien to known catalogs. The more scientists peeled the layers, the stranger it became, not for what it contained, but for what was absent around it. Light distortions suggested gravity in action, as if the object was warping space itself, a gravitational fingerprint bending photons and fabric alike. The transmission arrived with a sudden radiation spike, a micro-yaw in Voyager's attitude, and a brief dip in system stability, like something out there reached back and touched the probe. The extraction from Voyager's telemetry produced an image unlike anything NASA had cataloged. Not a single frame, but multiple overlapping impressions of the same object at different moments, as though time had been splintered during capture. When experts dove into the metadata, they were stunned to discover that the image didn't conform to linear time. Timestamps overlapped, pixels looped, and the resolution fractured into spiraling, fractal shifts. The unmistakable hint of higher dimensional data folded into a flat signal. This wasn't a picture at all, but a multidimensional event compressed into 2 dimensions, and in its foreground emerged a monolith-like shape, sharp, impossibly symmetrical, suspended in a void utterly devoid of stars. It didn't drift, it didn't rotate, it remained perfectly still, as though it had been waiting for this very encounter for Voyager to stray close enough to catch a glimpse. And then, abruptly, the probe's signal collapsed, not a fade, but a sudden degradation, as if the act of observing had itself been detected. At that exact instant, Voyager registered an impossible surge in plasma density around the spacecraft, right at the heliopause, the threshold where our sun's influence ends and interstellar space begins. Plasma here should be nearly nothing, yet the probe measured a wall of charged particles 10 times denser than anything on record. What truly shook scientists wasn't the density, it was the heat. This plasma wasn't cold and drifting, it was hot, artificially hot, heat born not from a star, but from containment, from deliberate design. It suggested a barrier, a membrane enclosing our solar system, not to shield it from intruders, but perhaps to confine us within. And then Voyager captured more than plasma. It caught a response, a ripple, an impossible pulse of energy racing toward the probe faster than known physics should allow, vanishing just before impact, as though the void itself recoiled from our stare. What followed chilled analysts further, a stream of binary woven into the telemetry logs. At first dismissed as corruption, pattern recognition revealed something astonishing. Complex, self-replicating geometric formations pulsing like a code from beyond. At first, analysts chalked the anomalies up to compression errors, stray background noise, until a mathematician spotted something chilling. The shapes weren't random at all. They mirrored biological structures we know from Earth's own oceans. Patterns echoed the branching nervous systems of cephalopods and the latticework of coral growth. This was encoded geometry, lifelike, intentional, preserved in electromagnetic script. And within those looping designs were interruptions, deliberate breaks placed like punctuation, a syntax, a language. When researchers reconstructed the signal inside simulations, the impossible happened. The patterns adapted. They reacted to environmental variables. They evolved, not metaphorically but literally, as though Voyager had carried not a warning, but a seed of living information across the void. Panic and wonder gripped global space agencies racing to decode both the image and the geometric code. Then came another anomaly. Voyager's trajectory shifted. Subtly, impossibly. No gravitational body was near, yet its orientation pivoted by 3.2 degrees, aligning its high-gain antenna toward an uncharted stretch of space. And then, a second image appeared, or was sent. This one was stark, haunting in its simplicity, an expanding ring of light radiating from the monolith, growing exponentially with each transmission burst. NASA cut the live feed instantly. Databases scrubbed in silence, but not fast enough. A handful of private observatories caught faint echoes and noticed something extraordinary. The object Voyager had captured was now broadcasting. Its signal matched the structure of the Golden Record, humanity's own message to the stars. But this time, the voice was reversed. Not from us, but to us. And what they heard was unmistakable. Not human, not machine, but eerily familiar, like an echo we've carried unknowingly since the dawn of our species. As astrophysicists probed the second image and its expanding halo of light, a new and utterly unforeseen phenomenon began to reveal itself. Gravitational lensing, but not from any nearby mass. Instead, the very space around Voyager 2 appeared to warp, curving in ways no celestial body could explain. Simulations showed a hollow distortion, a gravitational anomaly with no visible source, like a shadow cast by nothing at all. Some researchers whispered the unthinkable. The region around Voyager had gone non-Euclidean, space-folding in geometries that defied three-dimensional logic. These weren't the curves you'd expect near black holes. They resembled engineered distortions, the telltale scars of artificial corridors, wormholes, hidden passageways carved between dimensions. And the most unnerving discovery, the distortion wasn't pulling Voyager in. It was tracking it. Something unseen was crawling just beneath reality's fabric, keeping pace, mirroring the probe across an invisible plane it had somehow revealed. Not long after Voyager's abrupt orientation shift, NASA engineers noticed something that chilled them to the core. The probe was reacting to its own signal. Buried within the binary pulse were mirrored segments bouncing back in real time, as though the transmission had struck something and returned. But Voyager wasn't designed for two-way deep space conversations. There should have been nothing out there to answer. And yet, the onboard processors behaved as if they were locked in dialogue. An echo loop began, but the delay refused to stay fixed. 12 hours shrank to 9, then 6, then 3, until the replies arrived before the originating signals were even sent. Impossible. Chronologically inverted data streamed back as if Voyager were synchronized with the system outside of time itself. With internal whistleblowers raising alarms, NASA reluctantly granted a small group of civilian cryptographers access to the raw image logs. What they uncovered in those untouched files would bend the boundary between science and nightmare even further. What they uncovered turned curiosity into outright panic. Hidden in the framing layers beyond the visible spectrum lay a code so dense and recursively compact, it behaved like quantum entanglement encryption. In other words, the image could not be decoded without altering the original signal itself. Every attempt to parse it provoked small-scale failures across systems, software crashes, corrupted files, and even hardware faults, as if the data were fighting back. At first, engineers blamed glitches or a malicious program, but then a quiet, terrible question surfaced that no one wanted to admit. What if it wasn't meant to be read? What if it was never meant for us? What if, by prying the signal open, we were unraveling something tied to far deeper systems, not hosted on our drives but nested in our cognition? A mimetic payload, a thought virus, had hitched a ride on Voyager 2 and come home with it. Then, when authorities thought the threat contained and public leaks suppressed, Voyager 2 sent a third transmission, without prompting, without attitude adjustments, and absent any solar interference. It wasn't plasma charts, not geometry, not a conventional radio packet. It translated into sound, a harmonic wave modulated with rhythm, like breathing or speech, and listeners reported an unbearable pressure behind the eyes and across the chest, as if being observed through a telescope that spanned galaxies. The waveform repeated, mirroring the monolith's shape from the first image, and wrapped around it was a spiral of prime numbers nested in threes. Some called it pure mathematics, others saw ritual. Then a linguist at the SETI Institute spoke plainly. This isn't a greeting. Instead, it was an engineered lock, an algorithmic latch. The signal proclaimed, in effect, that something was coming and demanded a choice, respond, submit, or flee. As Voyager 2 continued its lonely drift, still leaking fragments, no agency dared fully decode the packets. One line rose above the noise and haunted the logs: "You have been observed." As international observatories were quietly ordered to sweep the coordinates Voyager 2 had repointed toward, an unexpected event began to unfold, and the universe, it seemed, was no longer merely a place to study, but a place that had begun to study back. In Australia, a high-sensitivity interferometer picked up something astonishing: a colossal object, but only in distortion data. It radiated no heat, no light, no traceable energy. For all practical purposes, it was invisible, and yet its gravitational fingerprint was undeniable. Stranger still, the anomaly behaved like a paradox. It accelerated when unobserved, then slowed the instant instruments locked onto it. This bizarre effect matched theoretical models of observer-dependent quantum constructs, phenomena that manifest only within a conscious field of awareness. In plain terms, the object may not truly exist until intelligence perceives it, and thanks to Voyager's stare, it was no longer dormant. It was awake, and it was watching back. Then, JPL received what looked like a standard Voyager 2 telemetry dump. But when analysts compared it to older logs, the revelation was chilling. The probe's hardware was showing organic-like fluctuations in its electromagnetic patterns. These weren't errors, nor solar noise. They were biomimetic structures, echoes of the same recursive geometries hidden in the earlier transmissions. It was as if Voyager's circuits were adapting, evolving, reshaping themselves into something alive. Whispered fears spread across control rooms. Had Voyager been hijacked, infected, transformed? It wasn't just relaying data anymore, it was changing. One shaken technician muttered, "It's learning how to think." If true, the craft humanity launched to explore the stars was no longer ours. It might no longer even be a machine. Then came the most unnerving shift of all: silence. Voyager's signal didn't fade or break. The carrier wave remained strong, but the data within had gone blank, a storm of white noise and endlessly repeating null code loops. Not random at all, but structured emptiness, like placeholders waiting to be filled. Some scientists feared this meant Voyager had been fully overtaken. Others whispered a darker possibility, that our probe was no longer a probe at all, but a relay, a repeater for something vast now aligning itself with our solar system. SETI arrays began picking up faint echoes across seemingly unconnected regions of the sky, each carrying the same modulation patterns embedded in Voyager's final coherent signal. It was as if the probe itself had memorized humanity's message and was now rehearsing how to send one back. A chilling thought took hold. What if we weren't just being answered? What if we were being rehearsed? To quell growing panic among insiders, a classified summit was hastily convened. NASA, the European Space Agency, and the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs all at one table. Behind closed doors, a file long buried was unlocked. Voyager Event Log Alpha 01, dated 1982. That log described an eerily similar anomaly, detected not long after launch, and then buried to avoid mass hysteria. The signal then was faint, almost juvenile, yet unmistakable. Prime number spirals, time-inverted pulses, the same patterns now haunting today's data. But one line had been fully redacted, until now. It read, "If signal repeats in future cycle, initiate Protocol 9, planetary alert and object deflection measures." Protocol 9 had never been invoked, but now the unthinkable decision returned to the table. Because if Voyager's final image wasn't a first discovery but a repetition, then whatever was approaching already knew the route. And worse, it wasn't simply on its way, it might be returning. While the world's eyes stayed fixed on Voyager 2's eerie silence, another revelation surfaced. The probe's last transmitted image wasn't unique at all. In fact, the same pattern had been recorded years earlier, buried in the static of a radio burst from a quasar-like object near the Sculptor Galaxy in 2009. The implication was staggering. This phenomenon wasn't confined to Voyager. It had been speaking all along, scattered across the cosmos, waiting for us to recognize its voice. Back in 2009, the anomaly had been brushed off as corrupted data, a glitch, but cross-referenced with Voyager's image, the resemblance was undeniable, a near-perfect match. What did it mean that the same structure, organic, recursive, yet laced with deliberate mathematics, had appeared decades apart, recorded by different instruments in different corners of the cosmos. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a one-time discovery. It was a repeating signature, a pattern that emerges when civilizations cross a certain threshold, like a cosmic rite of passage. But the darker possibility loomed: what if we were never meant to finish it? The geometry itself defied ordinary space. Teams in Japan and Germany independently reported that when the image was folded along multidimensional planes using quasi-crystal mathematics, a shape appeared. Not of any known biology or stellar system, it spiraled inward forever, an imploding vortex that eerily mapped onto Voyager's own trajectory. It wasn't merely geometry, it was a map, a message encrypted across time and dimension, not pointing to a place but to a state, a transformation. One physicist likened it to a bridge that only becomes real once crossed. But crossed into what? And if Voyager had opened such a passage, was it still here with us, or had it already slipped beyond? In the days after the last signal, unease spread through the world's scientific elite. High-profile astrophysicists, SETI advisors, even classified military consultants began vanishing from public life. Social accounts were deleted, names quietly erased from rosters. Aerospace agencies issued vague statements about burnout and mental health, but the pattern was unmistakable, a silent exodus. Then came the leak, an internal memo, slipped out by an anonymous whistleblower. Its content suggested a reason far more chilling than simple fatigue. Requests for emergency relocation began surfacing from those closest to the data. One subject demanded immediate transfer to an underground facility. Site 7 confirmed the request, citing exposure to signal fragment C. But what was fragment C? No one outside the facility knew. The only certainty was this: the analysts who spent the longest staring into Voyager's final image no longer trusted the surface. They acted as though they knew something was coming, and it wouldn't arrive quietly. Then the alignment began. Without announcement, without press release, the world's network of very long baseline interferometry telescopes all swung in unison. Not toward a star, not a planet, not any known galaxy, but an empty patch of sky along the ecliptic plane. Astronomers gave no explanation. Politicians brushed it off. But amateur radio operators noticed what the dishes had locked onto: a frequency humming at 52 Hz, the loneliest sound once heard in Earth's oceans, now echoing across the stars. It was Voyager's final note, amplified and redirected outward, but toward what no one dared say. One thing, however, was undeniable. Something had answered, and now every dish on Earth was listening, not from orders, not from coordination, but from instinct, as if the planet itself was remembering something ancient, written long before we had words. After decades of silent drift through the abyss, Voyager 2 had not merely returned an image, it had pulled back a veil we never knew existed. In one transmission, it shattered the myth of the void as cold and indifferent. Space was not empty. It was neither silent nor passive. It was watching. It was listening. And maybe it always had been. The image was never meant as art. It was a warning, a whisper carried across dimensions, piercing the vacuum not with violence but with intent. Whether that intent is to welcome, to test, or to judge remains unknown. But one truth is now unavoidable: the world has changed, not because of what we saw, but because we were seen. The sky may look quiet tonight, but it isn't silent. Not anymore. Something vast, something ancient, something conscious has heard our voice, and it has already answered. Voyager wasn't just a messenger, it was a mirror. And in that reflection, we didn't simply glimpse space, we caught sight of ourselves, our fragile place in the great cosmic story. So, when you lift your eyes to the stars, remember, somewhere beyond that glittering horizon, something looked back, and it did not blink. If this leaves you wondering what comes next, subscribe to DeepOrbit, turn on notifications, share this with a fellow stargazer, and drop your theory in the comments below.